Welcome and hello to everyone joining us for another seminar within the COPA Safety Seminar Series. My name is Sharon Chung. For those of you who haven't met me yet, I'm the Director of National Programming for COPA, of course, Canada's largest aviation association. My role at COPA is to establish programs like this one here, and I look forward to learning with you. If you are new, welcome to the party. These seminars are for everyone, so whether you're simply building hours or you're a seasoned pilot, join and participate as much as you'd like to. I challenge you to ask questions. There is a chat function to the right, so I'm going to go ahead and advance my slide here. You're probably curious what today's agenda is like. Oh, you know what? I think I need to mute. Is everybody on mute here? Oh, there we go. If you're wondering what today's agenda is, here it is on the screen. Big welcome from COPA and gratitude for you joining us here today. We will start with two presentations, one from our colleagues at NAV Canada. Philip Tate is here with us to talk about the runway service condition NOTAM format changes. These were implemented in August, and so certainly handy to be familiar with today as winter flying starts. We will then follow with a short presentation from our program sponsor, Tannis Aircraft Products. We have Mr. Doug Eving here with us today, and he'll join us again in December for our safety seminar. That'll wrap up the year, and we will then proceed with the full presentation for the day with Phil Lightstone and with Roger Hildesheim, moderated by a familiar face, Peter Campbell, in a slightly new role. So I'll leave it up to each individual to give a bit more of a background on themselves. After the presentation, we will have a short break, and then that will be followed by a Q&A session and then we'll wrap things up. I had mentioned earlier to ask your questions. You can also toggle that chat on and off if you find it distracting. There is a little red button if you're on your computer or laptop device that's on the right side of your screen. You can pop that on and off as you please. I tend to get a little chatty in these chats, so I have no qualms with you closing that off. We may not get to every question, but we do look at them, and if there's any glaring questions that you feel like wasn't resolved or responded to and you do want it to be responded to, send us a note, copa@copanational.org, our email. And of course, if you can't stay for the whole seminar, no hard feelings. We record every seminar, so these will be available in a few short days. All righty. Okay, so I prettied up my slide from last seminar if you were there, but just a reminder that there is an aircraft insurance incentive. I'll share the actual one-page document that has more information, this exact information, so you don't have to take notes, and feel free to download that document. It's also on our webpage as well. Some accident forgiveness here for simply participating. Okay, went too far ahead. And here are our prizes for our annual draw. The draw will take place in December for the last seminar of the year. So we've got some fancy prizes. There's 3 prize packs to draw off. The first 2 have a pretty fantastic retail value. The first place is at $2,600. Everything from a Lost Aviator coffee package to a Sirius XM package and some fun COPA membership incentives. So the more seminars that you've attended this year, the more entries that you had received. Special shout out to our COPA member, Kevin Brown, who had reached out to us after last month's safety seminar, giving us a little heads up on a little project that he's been working on. He has developed a aircraft inspection and aircraft maintenance app. So feel free to read the screen. And again, this recording will be made available later. I'll also post the slides in our members only section. plenty of functions. The focus right now is on ultralight, but eventually the volume or the aircraft available to add in will expand. Congratulations, Kevin, on or thank you, Kevin, for putting this together. The app is called Aim for Safety, by the way, and if you'd like to learn more, you can visit aimforsafety.ca. All right, so that concludes my presentation here. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And what we're going to do now is we'll start off with Philip Tate from Nav Canada to walk us through the RSC NOTAM changes. And Phil, as you're pulling up your screen, may I ask you to give a bit of a background on who you are and your role with Nav?
Sure. Hello, everyone. As mentioned, my name is Phil. I've been with Nav Canada for about 2 years now. Before that, I was in the military as a pilot, and I currently work in the standards and procedures section of Nav Canada with a focus on NOTAM. As a result, because of that role, I ended up being the liaison between Nav Canada and Transport Canada, essentially the go-to person between the two organizations as we implemented this change. Tonight we're going to just give you a basic, brief explanation of the new format and highlight some of the key differences from the legacy format. As Sharon already mentioned, the RSC NOTAM format became live on the 12th of August of this year. But before we start talking about the format itself, it probably helps understand why this change happened. So first, there was a new ICAO requirement for a global reporting format for runway surface conditions. And then separate to that, but timed at the same time, there was also new regulations being implemented from Transport Canada to change how the Canadian Runway Friction Index, or CRFI, was reported for some aerodromes. In addition, Transport Canada also wanted some unique differences from the ICAO prescribed format, and this resulted in a Canadian version which resulted in the RSC NOTAM. So what does the RSC NOTAM do? It primarily introduces the concept of the Runway Condition Code, or RWYCC. And this is a value that can be input into the flight computer of larger aircraft for performance purposes. This box here, or this matrix here I'm showing you, is actually the runway condition assessment matrix. And what it does is it aligns observed conditions with a preliminary runway condition code. This runway condition code, as you see, is from values from 0 to 6, with 6 being completely dry and 0 being the most slippery. It's important to note, though, that just because you see these observations doesn't mean this is going to relate to the code. The aerodrome operator actually has to confirm if these runway condition code values match up with the runway surface description. So, or sorry, that's a bad way of putting it. But if the runway condition code is, as it's a measure of slipperiness, if it accurately depicts the runway slipperiness. So they can actually downgrade the code depending on other observations, such as vehicle deceleration, directional control, pilot braking action reports, or CRFI readings, and in some cases even upgrade it. All that to say is that the runway condition code you see here in the matrix may not actually correlate to the conditions in the final report that you'll review prior to your flight. The other concept that's introduced by RSC NOTAM is the ability to report by thirds. And this is done by dividing the runway into 3 equal thirds and then reporting it for the direction of flight. These 3 thirds are then broken down into the touchdown portion, the midpoint portion, and the rollout What this means is that runway surface conditions, or CRFI, can be reported by thirds. So for the first portion of the runway, highlighted in yellow, it would have a runway condition code of 5. It would be 50% 1/8 inch dry snow, 25% compacted snow, and it would have a CRFI value of 0.4. The blue would correspond to the midpoint, and then of course the green then would correspond to the rollout, or the last third. However, there are also variations of the RC NOTAM format, depending on the aerodrome you'll fly into. And this is because the aerodrome operator actually decides on how to report the RC NOTAM for each runway, depending on the needs of their customers. So this means that RC and CRFI can be reported by thirds, or they can be reported by full runway length, which would be similar to the legacy format, or it could be a combination of the two. It's important to note that the runway condition code is actually only able to be reported when the runway surface conditions are reported by thirds. So in terms of the format itself, there's 3 distinct sections of the RC NOTAM. The first and largest section is the runway surface condition section. And as the name implies, this is the section where you find the runway condition codes and the conditions of the runway itself. Next is the CRFI section, where you'll find the CRFI values, if reported, for all the runways. If a CRFI is not reported, you'll generally see the term NR, which means not reported. And finally, there's a remarks section, with remarks being available for taxiways, aprons, and then general remarks themselves. In the format as well, there's actually, it's an important distinction to make regarding the validity times. The first is the RC NOTAM validity time. And this is the time shown in item C, if you've noticed that in your recent NOTAMs. And this is simply an administrative time indicating when the NOTAM will be removed from the system. The time that's most important to you for your flight would be the RC report validity time, as this will indicate the time the observation occurred, as well as the time at which this report is valid till in accordance with current regulations. And then finally is the CRFI observation time, and there is no change from the legacy format. So now that we've discussed a little bit about the format, let's discuss some of the differences, or the main differences, between the legacy format, NOTAM-J, and RC NOTAM. What I have here is a NOTAM-J indicating similar conditions as the RC NOTAM for the exact same runway. And I did this just to highlight the differences you'll be able to see. So almost right away, you'll be able to tell the RC NOTAM has additional spaces in between. And this is done to make it more readable. So you'll have a space in between each runway surface condition report, as well as a space from then between to the CRFI section, and then a space as well with our remarks section. The next change you'll notice is that only up to 2 runway surface conditions are allowed to be reported in RC NOTAM. Similarly, or as a result of this, the percentage of coverage no longer has to add up to 100%. In addition, the reporting of dry in the new RC NOTAM format will actually only be reported when the condition is 100% dry. And finally, in order to tell when there's 2 conditions reported for the same section of runway, this is indicated by the word and this has been typed in red to highlight it in this case. Next difference is the measurement of depth. Previously, it was measured in decimals of inches, and now it's measured in fractions of an inch. You'll also, a small difference too, you notice that the abbreviation for inches has changed.
Phil, I'm sorry to jump in here. With the NOTAM, as we know, they can be quite lengthy. I know some folks are having a hard time seeing. If you are, there was a really good pro tip from Liz here to simply turn off the chat by hitting that red button. It'll help enlarge the screen.
Would it be beneficial if I went back a few slides, or is it okay to continue where I am?
I think where you're at is just fine. And we'll also cover this in our December seminar. So if we need to, we'll repeat that information.
Okay. The last change I want to highlight is that the use of full text is used more often than with NOTAM-J. So for example, here, the abbreviation SNOW is actually now spelled out. And so because we're reporting by thirds and because we're reporting by full length, that will cause the NOTAM to look longer, but hopefully it is more readable. That summarizes the main differences I want to cover regarding reading the new format. On the page here are some references which I will paste in the chat if you wanted to look more about it. If you really only want to read one, I would suggest this advisory circular from Transport Canada, as that would probably be the most relevant to your situation. And that concludes my presentation.
Thanks so much, Paul. If I may, just a quick question. And so for those of you who might be wondering why this presentation, why now? Well, winter is upon us in many cases here, depending. I don't know if I've seen any occurrences yet, but we certainly wanted to keep this community abreast of new changes that they need to be familiar with. So the phraseology, there's some changes to phraseology, but a quick question on we know that not all aerodromes are made the same. So are there differences in where the RSC NOTAM format would be applied as it relates to aerodromes or airports, Phil?
So you can generally, it's a hard question to answer because it is up to the aerodrome operator's choice. And I'm looking at, I look at them, they're being, I guess, disseminated right now. So when I look at them, generally speaking, the larger aerodromes would be the ones that report by thirds and CRFI reported by thirds, because for many of the larger aerodromes, it's actually a legal requirement. But for a lot of the small aerodromes, most of what I've seen is that they will continue to report by full runway length, which is more similar to the format that you're used to. All that to say, though, that there's no guarantee to broad brush it like that, simply because the aerodrome operator has a choice.
Okay, that's a fair point. Peter Campbell had just left a comment there that there's many Western airports that are getting snow in winter conditions. So very timely presentation, and we appreciate you for spending some time with us, Phil. So thank you so much.
Not a problem. If there's any questions, I guess you'll forward them to me later.
Absolutely. If you put them in the chat, I will direct them to Mr. Tate here and the team at NAV Canada. And we will again present some of this information in December.
Perfect. Thank you very much for your time.
Great. Have a great rest of your evening, Phil.
Thank you. You too.
Phil.
Bye.
Okay. Well, we're going to go over to what I'm going to call an OKP, a original key player. Doug even here is presented to the COPA community before, so you might be familiar with Tannis aircraft products, but I think it would be worthwhile to certainly learn more, especially timely with some winter messaging. So Doug, I kick it off to you.
Thanks, Sharon, and welcome from the United States, since we surely haven't been able to meet in person very much. So as Sharon mentioned, we're going to do a little bit longer presentation in December. So this is the Reader's Digest condensed version of getting ready for winter, and also in the theme of annual inspections. I'm just going to talk briefly about aircraft basic preheating and be available for questions if you have them. So I'm going to run through these slides pretty quickly. First of all, the basics. Why do we preheat? We know that the engine manufacturers tell us, but to reduce the wear of the engine, and so our aircraft engine will start. And that is really the key part of why we developed our product. Prevent cylinder scoring, make sure you have oil flow, because oil pressure does not equal oil flow. And it really is, our tagline is Tannis, aviation safety starts with Tannis aircraft. So here's some wording, and it gets a little wordy, but I'm just going to breeze through them. When we develop a preheat system, we want to make sure that we're getting the cylinder head temperature above 50 degrees above the ambient temperature, and the oil at least 40 degrees above ambient. But we don't want the oil warmer than the cylinder. And that's because moisture is inside of your oil in the bottom of your sump. If that moisture evaporates, which it will do when you're heating it up, and it's warmer than the top of your cylinders, it will condense. And that's kind of the tip we want to leave you with thinking about tonight. We've developed our complete preheat system in such a way that you can leave it plugged in all the time. It keeps everything above the oil line warmer than the oil. And we do that by using very small elements that go inside of each cylinder. So you see the 1/4x20 elements replace one of your rocker cover bolts, fasteners, or an intake tube, and then a pad on the bottom of your sump for a 4-cylinder aircraft. If you have a 6-cylinder, of course, you have 6 of the bolts and 1 pad on the sump and 1 on top of the case. One of the things that we really want to convey to you is we do all these tests and we share this information. You're going to see some graphs here, but these are also things you can do with most of your planes, or you can surely find that information out. If you happen to fly this aircraft, which we're lucky enough to do on many occasions, you can start up, before you start up the aircraft, you can take a look at your cylinder head temperatures and your oil temperature prior to starting the engine, so you know what temperature they're at and how does that compare to the ambient temperature that you're dealing with. And that drives into this. These are the meat of what we really want you to understand about preheating. These are the 4 cylinders in this 172. We've got them 60 degrees, almost 70 degrees above the ambient temperature. And then the oil rides below it. And we want that always to have this gap, so there's no possibility of moisture that's evaporating that could go up and condense on your rocker cover or your valve or your cam, if it's a cam that is sitting outside of the oil. If you need more than that 50 to 60 degrees above ambient, because several places in Canada you will need that, an insulated cover will give you almost double the effect, but it'll take much longer. So our ramp up is in 1.5 hours, 2 hours in an unheated hangar. If you needed that doubling, then you're going to have to do it overnight or have 6 to 8 hour time period that gets that full 120 degrees or 100 degrees above ambient. And one of the things that we run across quite a bit are people that use just an oil sump element or go to your automotive store for your light experimental aircraft and put that onto the oil. And this is the oil temp on one of our customers' planes with the cylinder temperatures here. Really sets you up for a concern with moisture handling. We took that system off, put on ours. Here's our cylinders. Here's the oil temp. Again, exactly what you want to see from a preheat system. There's my contact information. I'll leave that up there for a little bit, but just wanted to give a heads up for folks as we're getting into, doing annual inspections and, hey, does my preheat system work? One of the easiest ways to find out is take and plug your preheat system into a watt meter, very much available from your big box retailers. Our 4-cylinder system, our current 4-cylinder system draws about 240 watts. Our 6-cylinder system draws 460 watts. If you got 240 watts or thereabout, 10% on either side of that being consumed, you know that every one of your elements are working, and that's really your annual. Other than when people are doing annual work, you want to make sure all the wires are secured and there's no loose plug-ins or where the short power plug is not rattling around to cause any type of concern there. I'll put a little teaser out. Phil Lighthouse and I talked a little bit this morning. We also have come out and partnered with a company called Switching On with a preheat remote device that you can use the data band of the cellular towers to turn on your preheat system. We're just getting it launched into Canada. So unfortunately, if you live in this part, you're not going to like us too much, but we'll be giving you some more information soon once we get more details out and being able to make that product available for those of you in Canada. And I will jump back out to here. I don't know if you have any questions. I haven't been looking at the chat, Sharon. I'm happy to answer some of them now, or I will hang around to the end too.
Very good. Well, I should have said hello to our neighbors down south. So hi, and no hard feelings on not being available everywhere. There's a couple questions. We only really have time for one for now. Really on the duration of leaving the preheat on, as well as how high the temperature can go before it goes south.
Yeah, so very good question on can you leave your preheat system on all the time? Ours is the only one that you can. Ours is an STC system, and the reason you can is because we get everything above the oil line warmer than the oil. If you shut it off or put it on a timer or you have it on a thermostat, things are going to go up and down, so you don't want to do that. And the temperature, we get that 50 to 60 degrees above ambient without the insulated cover, and then 100 to 120 with the insulated cover. That is basic on what's your ambient temperature, so that we'll ride that curve. And I know a lot of people ask when it comes to temperature, when should I start preheating? Engine manufacturers basically say you need to when your engine sees 20 degrees Fahrenheit. We see many, many advantages when your overnight temperatures are starting to get into the low 50s, upper 40s Fahrenheit from the wear and tear of your engine.
Very, very knowledgeable. So thank you very much, Doug. There are some questions on the side, so feel free to, we'll chat about that. So thank you very much for that excellent presentation. A little teaser, as Doug mentioned, to December, where we'll get a more fulsome presentation. So let's continue on to our annual inspections presentation. Peter, Phil, Roger, welcome to our virtual stage. Peter, who you are many of you are familiar with, is moderating tonight's conversation. So I'll let you all take it on.
Okay, guys, we're going to get right into the presentation because I see there's about 350 of you out there waiting to go. So let's, without any further ado, Roger, Phil, and myself will start the presentation. We've entitled this Owning the Maintenance Process. You're going to hear a lot more from Phil and Roger than from myself as the moderator. To get things going, let's take a look at the agenda. So very common question at the start of these, is this presentation a pilot recurrency training program or is it not? And this one is not a pilot recurrence training program session. We had one last month. We'll have one in December, and those ones will qualify for your 2-year currency, but this one does not. So I do want to offer you my greetings, our greetings, and welcome to this, what I'm calling the third installment of our trilogy on aircraft ownership. We won't be signing any logbooks today, but we're going to deliver what I think is probably tons of good information that Roger and Phil and myself are bringing to you. So stay a while with us. Today, we're going to give you a perspective on aircraft ownership, whether you're a new owner or not. And this perspective is on taking ownership of your annual inspection. We've talked about the ownership of your plane. We're focusing tonight on that annual inspection. It may not even be your first annual inspection, but we want you to be the owners of it from this point forward. We want you to get your fingers dirty and get more knowledgeable about your aircraft. So our safety program, la mission de diminuer le nombre d'incidents et d'accidents en aviation générale et d'améliorer ou promouvoir la sécurité aérienne par un programme de sensibilisation proactive. In other words, our mission has not changed. We want to make you safer, smarter, and more focused on being safe pilots. Thinking safety, and that starts before you go flying and continues on through the flight. At this point, I'd like to turn the seminar over to Roger. So that's just the second one of those. Okay. We're going to encourage collaboration with our COPA members in flights and with external stakeholders such as NAV Canada, Transport Canada, the Safety Board, and others. We want to promote compliance with regulations. So, Roger, I'll turn the card over to you.
Thanks, Peter, and good evening to everybody. If we had somebody up in Inuvik, I think we could say we've got coast to coast to coast, but I think we have only coast to coast. I see Comox represented, and I see somebody from St. John's, so this is great. We're going to introduce each other to show you how tight a team we are, right? And so I'll introduce Phil. He's a technologist that focuses in IT and telecommunications systems. You've probably run across him as an aviation journalist with Plane Tech and Plane Investments in COPA magazine, Aviation Consumers, Wings magazine, Helicopter magazine, and he also runs a Plane Talk podcast. Phil's been licensed since 1995. He's got both US and Canadian licenses. He's a VFR pilot, VFR over the top, night rating. And he currently flies the Commander 114 Bravo with about 2,000 hours. So that's it for Phil. I think I hand it over to you, Phil, for the next ones.
That's right. And thanks, everyone, for having the team here with you tonight. And Roger, who I've gotten to know through this event, preparing for it, that is actually really kind of a cool guy. Roger is an accomplished pilot flying since 1982. He's the past president of the Gatineau Gliding Club and a flight instructor. He owns an Aranca Champ and an Alistair SZD-55 high-performance glider designed for competitive use with high cruising speed. Roger is an engineer working for Lockheed Martin on projects that he'd like to talk about, but sadly he'd have to kill us if he did. Roger is a member of the Smith Falls Flying Club with over 2,300 hours in gliders and 400 hours in powered aircraft. And if you could imagine, every glider flight that Roger conducts has one forced landing. He's not only an accomplished pilot engineer, but does a lot of his own maintenance tasks on his Champ. He's also an amateur radio operator and a computer guy. So we can really probably think of Roger as a total geek.
But a great geek.
A great geek. And it's really my pleasure to introduce Peter Campbell, who I think you've all come to know and love during his tenure at COPA. And it's really great to have you here. And a little bit about Pete. He graduated from the Royal Military College of Canada in Kingston, Ontario, with a Bachelor of Military Arts and Science degree, and Seneca College with an Aeronautical Engineering Technology Diploma. He spent 32 years in the Canadian Armed Forces. He was a commanding officer of a frontline flying unit conducting military operational missions on 3 continents. He's flown everything from Tudors, CF-101s, T-33s, F-5s, and of course, dream trips in the F-104 at Cold Lake Fighter Town. Lucky guy. How good does that get? As you see, he's accumulated a number of civilian ratings, including being a Class 2 instructor. After retiring from the military, and Peter, thank you so much for your service, he transitioned into a variety of aviation-focused civilian roles. He was COPA's Director of External Relations and is the Chief Flying Instructor with the Kingston Flying Club. He's had a number of interesting roles as he continued his aviation career after retiring from the military. Thank you, Pete.
Thanks, Phil. Thanks very much.
Well, for those that are new to aircraft ownership, whether you own or are thinking about buying, maintenance is absolutely critical to every flight. You can see lots of aircraft that are on either ends of the maintenance spectrum. Some that are well maintained and some that are barn finds. Today's seminar will hopefully give you some insights to maintaining your aircraft and to really a better than safe standard. For certified aircraft, the CARS and AIM provides guidance as to what has to be done to an aircraft. But ultimately, the quality, the impact of the quality of maintenance is your life, your passengers, and those on the ground. So maintenance and your approach to maintenance is really important. You should start thinking of maintenance as a process. It begins and ends with documentation, not only journey logs and technical logs, but the process of maintaining and installing parts into your aircraft. For example, the commander that I own in partnership has a parts manual, but does not illustrate to the owner mechanic how to, as an example, remove the front seats. There's a commander's online owners group that I belong to, and they've posted step-by-step documentation on how to remove the seats without damaging the seat rails. Just FYI, one of my buddies just reported he was doing it his first time. It took him 3 hours to get 2 seats out of the airplane. So I hope that you come away from today's presentation with an understanding that maintenance is far more than nuts and bolts and wrenches and screwdrivers. It's all about a mindset. Having resources in hand to help guide you and aid you through very specific processes, but with the goal of moving you from a reactive maintenance to a proactive maintenance program. Part of that proactive approach is really a partnership with your mechanics when we're talking about certified airplanes, and they really become part of your team. Today, we'll go into details about this approach, some best practices, and perhaps talk a little bit about what's on the horizon. And hopefully, we'll have plenty of time for Q&A at the end. Over to you, Roger.
Thanks, Phil. I was looking at that picture on the last slide, and I was just wondering who's who in that picture, but no, we're not going to go there. So one of the items, if you were at the seminar about a month ago, we did a seminar on responsibilities of maintenance and who was responsible for what. And Peter and I, spoke about a few different items. Well, we're diving more into the details now. And this is really aimed for those of you that are maybe purchasing your first aircraft or purchasing a new aircraft, different aircraft than the one you have. But a lot of times these things are kind of common sense, but you gotta stay organized and methodical with it, because there's a lot of money you're forking over, whether you're in a partnership, even in a partnership, it can be substantial monies. And, there are some good tools for partnerships when you're buying an aircraft. COPA, I believe, has a pro forma partnership agreement to start with. So things like that, don't forget to look around the COPA site. There's a lot of useful information in there on the members portion of the site. If you purchase this aircraft and you've had a reputable AME, somebody you trust, because this aircraft is another member of your family and your life depends on it, as both Peter and Phil have said, you're probably going to have a little bit of an anomaly list, maybe not quite snags, but just little things that your AME said, yeah, it's an okay plane, but these things need to be addressed, over the next 6 months, the next 12 months, and be aware that this particular model of aircraft eats these components on a 5-year basis or something. So you're going to have a little list of items like that. I have yet to talk to people that have bought an aircraft and, don't have a sort of hit list of things to do once you get that aircraft. And we each have our own standards associated with that. There's some obvious ones, tires and brakes. So a lot of people tend to like to ride the brakes continuously, and maybe the brakes have had a rough life. Maybe it's time to, not just machine the rotors or anything or rehash the rotors, but get new rotors, get new pads. Maybe if the calipers are suspect, do that. And, tires, when you think about it, and anybody that rides a motorcycle, this probably resonates. You know, when I was in my motorcycle class, and you know, the instructor sort of came up and was holding kind of a toonie. Well, they didn't have toonies at that time, but a coin that size. You realize that's the patch of rubber that you're throwing your motorcycle around, you know, in these curves and everything else. Well, take a look at how much rubber you actually have on the ground on the runway with your aircraft. It isn't very much, and they're relatively cheap insurance. And a huge improvement in reliability, because if you ever do blow a tire on landing, on takeoff, on taxi, it's usually going to be very inconvenient. So please don't hesitate when you start to see cracks developing, either in the tread or on the sidewall. Replace them. It's good preventative maintenance. Spark plugs. Does the former owner, or did the former owner of your aircraft basically have a digital approach to how they handled leaning, right? A lot of aircraft burning 100 low lead can really benefit from being leaned on the ground. So take a look at the plugs. If there's the least bit suspicious, spend the money. Get new plugs. Easy peasy, but could also improve reliability. Paint and corrosion. Boy, you really got to look, particularly on tail draggers, corrosion in the aft part of the fuselage. Water flows downhill. If that plane has been sitting outside, chances are there's probably something that's corroded, or has been corroded, or has been repaired. It's just a fact of life with, you know, conventional geared aircraft. Make sure you do a really good inspection and understand what you're getting at. When was the last time this plane was recovered? Seat fabric. Oh yeah, I'm just going to go down to Fabricland and, you know, get a good friend of mine to make new seat covers. Well, you probably don't, because there's this little standard out there about fireproof and whether those materials will catch fire, or whether the foam catches fire, and there's standards for that. So please don't cut corners on that. Fire is an absolutely hideous thing to have in your aircraft. There's a reason why there are approved fabrics and such for the aircraft. Again, something you don't want to be cutting corners on. Anybody that's flown rather geriatric Cessnas knows about interior plastics, the lack thereof, or the broken elements thereof. There are some aftermarket options, particularly if you're in an owner maintenance scenario. But look around. It might be worthwhile finally investing and doing some kind of an internal upgrade on the aircraft with the interior plastics. And don't forget, as aircraft age, components will break and will wear. There was an incident, boy, about 6 years ago, if I remember correctly, down in Oshawa, where a on-off switch for a landing light, I think it was in a 150, there's a TSB report about it. But essentially, you know, when the 150 is brand new, a lot of the switches are clean and tidy and, you know, no corrosion inside. But as soon as you get some corrosion in those switches, the resistance goes up slightly, and that switch may have been okay for meeting the power rated requirements fresh off the factory floor. But 50 years later, in this case, the switch started overheating and started a small fire. So this was a certified aircraft with a certified switch, and it just points to the fact that stuff gets old. Corrosion can happen. It can be hidden in there. Maybe it's, you know, time when you see a questionable switch to flip it over. Overhaul versus new components. Really depends on how you're looking at your aircraft. There's a lot of very reputable overhauls that will do life as well as good as new. Or maybe you're the type of person that just wants to deal with new. Mags will be a wonderful, dual, redundant, reliable set of equipment on your engine, as long as you remember to maintain them. And, you know, every 500 hours, take them off, get them overhauled. You know, make sure they're clean. Not just inspect and say, yeah, that looks okay. There could be some latent issues for the delta price of getting it done. Again, you're in the aircraft, right? Solid state magnetos also go a long way to improving reliability. And in the context of having, you know, no two things exactly alike, you know, a very sweet solution is to keep one mag as a traditional magneto and switch over the other mag to a solid state magneto. You get a longer TBO, a little bit of redundancy, and you're not both all in with both solid state mags. So keep that in mind. Gauges, you know, those really reliable fuel gauges that are in almost every general aviation aircraft. Sorry, that sounds a little too sarcastic, but you know, and that stick you use to dip and make sure. There are some products out there that are purporting that they are reasonably accurate and using modern technologies. Still carry the dipstick, but you may want to consider that through there. And if you've got fuel tank bladders or wet wings, there's probably some preventative tasks that can be done there. When was the last time a tank bladder was replaced? It's rubber, it's going to age, it's going to crack. Do you really want to wait until you're about to head off to Oshkosh on that big vacation and find out you've got tired old rubber that's starting to leak? Or do you just say, hey, it's been 15 years, let's get on with it? All right, day before your first flight. I think I'm still here, eh, Phil? Yeah.
You are.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Little things you can do to fly this aircraft. Talk to somebody if you can find somebody that's maybe flown an aircraft like that type. Crawl through this thing called the Pilot Operating Handbook. It's amazing what you can learn. You know, if you haven't looked at it for a while, particularly if it's been your own plane and everything, maybe blow the dust off it and take a look at the speeds. Remember that a lot of the speeds in the POH are at maximum gross weight. So I'll just throw that out there because, you know, you can do the little scaling for your actual flying weight, and you may want to know what those speeds are, whether they're approach, takeoff, VX, VY, for what you're going to be flying on that day, not at maximum gross. Avionics and glass panels. There's no need to be jumping into an aircraft burning Lycoming or Continental hours and dead dinosaurs, credit to David Suzuki, you know, on the ground while you fiddle with the panel. I know Garmin and a lot of other manufacturers have online simulators that you can download on the computer, and you can play around on your computer and get familiar with how that screen works. And it might actually help keep your head up looking out of the cockpit on that VFR flight instead of down low punching away while you're safely navigating in the skies. There's lots of courses and simulators out there, even something like X-Plane, the new Microsoft one. I mean, just to get familiar with things, know where the switches and knobs are. You know, close your eyes, run through the ones, alternate static, pitot heat, whatever. You should at least be able to move your hand to the general location where that particular instrument or control is, just out of building up some primacy with controls and awareness through that. Military was doing that for many, many years. And engine starting procedures, and this can be radically different aircraft to aircraft. I'll give you the rundown. You know, with the three main aircraft that I wind up flying, the four main aircraft I fly, 172 out of Smiths Falls is really simple. You know, you sit there, you turn, you start, you let go, spring loads back, life is great. Engine starts like a car. The Citabria tow plane at our gliding club, it's got toggle switches up on the wing root. It has an impulse mag on the left mag only. So you have to start it on the left, get it going, and then turn on the right mag. It wouldn't be the first time that somebody forgot to turn on the right mag and wonders why they're not climbing very well. So it's a different procedure to start. Our Pawnee has dual impulse on both mags. So you start on both mags to go there. And my beloved Champ, well, you make sure the mags are off after you prime and pull it through. And it again has dual impulse on both. So make sure you're aware with your aircraft, something as simple as what type of mags you have on what elements and where. So it's very valuable. As well, weight and balance. When was the last time the weight and balance was done? You know, is it accurate? It can be an amendment if it was simple equipment changes that aren't too big, but maybe that's one of the first things you want done is to get an actual weight and balance. If you're a member of EAA, a lot of chapters have scales available for rent and whatever. Use them. Get familiar with the speeds. Goes back to the POH. How does it fuel? How does the fuel system work? Is it a left or right or both? What happens when you're in these different switch positions? Double check where you are. Engine oil, what's the minimum that you need for it? De-icing fluid, hydraulic fluid, and of course the numbers for takeoff, climb, cruise, and any unusual landing or takeoff procedures. Trim settings. There are some aircraft that are very, very miserable when they're poorly trimmed. PA-12s, for instance, are known, if you're not properly trimmed, you are pushing or pulling an awful lot, in there with that jack screw trim on the Pipers. So be aware, again, your POH is your friend. And look at videos, talk to people, talk to other people. You talk to a pilot tell them about the plane they're flying, you probably have to sit down for half an hour. So all that knowledge is there, you just got to go out and get it.
Right on, Roger. Awesome review of all that stuff. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, so you've been flying around in your airplane, your new airplane, that is, for almost a year, and it's time for your first annual inspection. Well, hopefully you've selected a trusted and reputable maintenance shop to look after your airplane. Now, as I say, not all shops are created equal. Finding that right shop is not only about price, but more importantly, trust and quality. As I think you've heard a theme in the presentation, you're putting your life in their hands. That's why I like to think of it as a partnership. Ideally, it'd be great to have a mechanic or a shop that has a licensed pilot, as well, who'll come fly the airplane with you, or ideally without you, after they've taken your airplane apart to 1,000 pieces during the annual and hopefully put it back together without any issues. We kind of get concerned about this syndrome called child mortality syndrome. You take something that's working really well, take it apart to 1,000 pieces, put it back together, and it might have some new problems it didn't have before. Well, many, but not all, shops will allow the owners to take part in the maintenance process, also known as owner-assisted maintenance. My shop that looks after the Commander, they actually have two rates. $95 if they do the work, and $125 if I help. Actually, just kidding about that. But many shops will welcome pilot owners to be part of the maintenance process, taking the view that an informed pilot owner will require less management over time. They'll make pilot owners that are engaged into the whole maintenance process will make decisions quickly and will have an appreciation not only of the work, but will be part of the decision-making process in terms of what do we need to be repaired to maintain safety, but what could we defer to another time, like maybe perhaps some yellowing plastic lenses for the landing lights. When you start the annual inspection, it should be really well documented, not only in terms of all the airworthiness directives and service bulletins for your airplane, but safety-related repairs or upgrades, which are proactive rather than reactive. As Roger mentioned, the tires might be a little bit worn, and maybe during the annual is a good time to replace those tires as you've got some downtime. Specifically, as a great example in the Commander, there's this little tiny bolt. It's about this big. And it holds the landing gear's torque tube in place. And over the course of time, this little bolt can wear and break, and it causes the torque tube to rotate out of its position. It results in the landing gear collapsing. And that's just based on this $1.25 bolt. And during an annual inspection with the aircraft up on jacks, maybe about 10 minutes of time to replace it. So as they say, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And in case you're wondering, yes, we've had the instance where that bolt was pulled out of the Commander's torque tube, and you could see the wear on it. And for another $1.25, let's just replace them, put brand new ones in. Interestingly, Transport Canada has a website for continued airworthiness directives called CAUSE, and you can search your aircraft with your registration mark. It brings up a really convenient list of all the ADs and their numbers for your specific airframe, engine, and propeller. Then there's miscellaneous equipment like avionics that aren't included, and it requires a separate search on the CAUSE website. These may not be specific to your aircraft, as the AD may or may not apply to the hardware that may not be installed in your airplane. I think it's over to you, Pete.
Just a second. I think there's a little bit more there. The upgrade wish list and interior exteriors and that stuff. I think that's still you, Phil.
Yeah. So you want to, as Pete said, you want to really create an upgrade wish list, and when you're when the airplane's in the shop for its annual, it's an excellent time to clean the aircraft, especially if they're pulling the seats out. I tend to use that as an opportunity to clean the carpeting. We have a leather interior, so I use Mother's leather cleaner, clean all the seats, and just kind of get the airplane ready for the new flying season. And of course, if you have a bunch of squawks from your previous flights, it's a great time to pull that list out, review it with your mechanics, create an updated watch list, and then determine the process to fix those squawks list. Yeah, over to you, Pete.
All right, thanks, Phil. So let's get down to a little bit of what we talked about last month, and that is kind of where the rules meet the road, if you will, and under maintenance requirements and the responsibility for maintenance. And it's pretty simple, really, when you think about it. We've talked about this aspect of ownership, and you, the owner, as it says in the CARS, is responsible for scheduling the work to keep the aircraft airworthy, whether it's an hours-based item or a calendar-based item. All of that scheduling is up to the owner. Now, there's lots of guidelines. There's lots of schedules that are out there. The aircraft manufacturers of certified aircraft will have their own developed schedule that the FAA or Transport Canada, if it's an American-made or a Canadian-made airplane, approved. And that certainly is the easy road for you to take, but it's a bit generic, and it doesn't necessarily apply specifically to your case or the case that you and your group do with the airplane. You can always amend the schedule and get that as a transport-approved schedule so that you are backed up, if you will, by Transport Canada. So that's your responsibility, is the scheduling. And then the mechanic, really, the AME, is responsible for the quality of the work, and he or she will also detail any discrepancies that were found and if they were fixed or not. Because not only is the owner responsible for the scheduling, but it's also the owner who decides what work is done or not done. And in theory, the mechanic only does the work that was tasked and does not do work that was not tasked by the owner unless there's an updated agreement and the owner acknowledges the new finds that the AME has found and then tasks the AME to do that. So that basic maintenance schedule is in CAR 60586, and it talks about the basis of the scheduling, the intervals, and the mandatory items. As I said a few minutes ago, can be calendar-based or operational cycles-based, and a lot of it's based on what the aircraft manufacturer has told Transport Canada or the FAA when they started. One of the big items is this notion of care and custody. Just like it says in the airworthiness directives and everything else, is that you, the owner, are responsible for the care and custody. Your aircraft must be maintained in accordance with, this is for a certified aircraft, maintained in accordance with the type design specifications for that aircraft, and that's what keeps the C of A valid. By you complying with the airworthiness directives, that's how we keep it airworthy, and that's what Phil was talking about. It's a bit different, a little bit looser and lighter for amateur built and owner maintenance aircraft because there are not as many applicable ADs to those, except perhaps the engine. We can also make sure that both the original and updated weight and balances are available. There used to be in the cars a rule that said that you didn't have to do a weight and balance change or re-weighing unless the aircraft was a change of about 2%, and it might have been actually as high as 5% at one point. These days, all it says is that any wholesale mod will require re-weighing the aircraft, and then that new weight and balance detail provided in with the other documentation of the airplane, so that the weight and balance accurately reflects the current weight and balance in an empty state. And that gives us that great appreciation of how owners are responsible for the maintenance, and mechanics are the people that do the regulated work with, as Phyllis said, with the support of the owner if he and the AME agree. Let's switch over to Phil, who's going to talk about documentation. Thank you.
Well, not only is aviation a heavily regulated industry, but it's exceptionally paper-centric. As aircraft owners, we're required to maintain a journey log, which stays in the aircraft, and a technical log, which stays in the ground. And essentially, they're duplicates of each other with a lot more detail in the technical logs. Each flight from the journey log is transcribed into the technical logs. And that's typically done maybe once a year at the annual by the AME. Well, many aircraft components, as we heard earlier, are time sensitive, like magnetos and propellers. Keeping track of hours and dates can be arduous, if you're completely paper driven. However, there are some very cool cloud-based electronic logbooks on the marketplace, which simplifies this task. AirBly is a Canadian company which has a unique system to automate journey logs. It starts with this little portable box about the size of a big hockey puck. It sits on the aircraft's dashboard. It's called the Phoenix Satellite Tracker, which is battery operated and communicates to the Globalstar satellite network. They're the same folks that bring to you the Find Me Spot product. The Phoenix little satellite tracker has a bunch of built-in motion sensors that record date and time of engine on to engine off and wheels up to wheels down, and working out all the time math for you. When you set up the system, you enter in the total hours for your engine and for the airframe. You can set up recurring maintenance records for anything that you want based upon hours, either engine or airframe, number of landings, or even calendar days. For example, you can set up a maintenance reminder for each magneto, inclusive of when the last inspection and repair occurred. You can even add a reminder at a specific number of hours remaining. The AirBly system will send you reminder emails as you get close to that maintenance due time. The data is stored in the cloud, but also on your smart device like your iPhone or iPad. And I understand from AirBly that Transport Canada has approved the use of electronic logbooks, replacing or augmenting paper books. When now talking about the technical logs, there's another company called Plain Logics, and they have an interesting solution to technical logbooks. They begin by reproducing your technical logs by scanning all the paper entries and all the component technical documentation. And they offer a wide variety of solutions, from the owners scanning each document themselves or outsourcing the scanning and data entry to PlaneLogix. Personally, I'd be a little concerned about shipping my logbooks and possibly having them lost in transit. Can you imagine? A big part of the value of your airplane is in your logbooks, and all of a sudden they'd evaporate. In fact, some of their customers will personally drive the logbooks to PlaneLogix in Cariboro, North Carolina. The system's well thought out, with their founders being pilots and owning a Cirrus SR-20. Rob Wilkes, their co-founder, started the company after that aha light bulb moment, when one of his mechanics misplaced his aircraft logbooks. The AME spent 2 weeks searching for the logbooks, which were fortunately eventually found. Can you imagine being Rob, the amount of stress he must have went through? And that really, created the innovation with Rob. Well, interestingly, the PlaneLogix system will talk to AirBly. So every time you fly your airplane with AirBly active in the cockpit, the AirBly system will copy the information to the PlaneLogix system through what's called API data integration. For non-computer geeks, that means that flight records are automatically copied into the PlaneLogix technical logs with no user intervention. In other words, it's completely magic to the user. Can we do the next slide? Well, so we've had our first annual, oops, kind of ahead of myself, sorry. Well, for those of us that don't want to spend money on electronic logbook system, really inexpensive, handy tools, an Excel spreadsheet. They're pretty easy to set up, and for older pilots on the call, you could always get the help of your 11-year-old grandchild to help out. Don't forget to update the aircraft's weight and balance with minor changes like removing a boat anchor ADF receiver. A simple amendment to the weight and balance can be done. You don't have to reweigh the airplane. However, if the shop, over the course of time, many owners might not have done a great job in record keeping, so you might want to consider reweighing the airplane. You might be surprised at how much your aircraft has been dieting. Finally, tracking budgets and costs associated with maintenance ensures that you don't have any heart-stopping surprises when you get the bill from the mechanics. What I like to do is meet with the mechanics after the inspection part of the annual, review with them what needs to be repaired or remediated, work out parts and time budgets. And that way I've documented everything into a spreadsheet, and it gives me a great way to understand what is being repaired now and what we're going to defer later. And then when I get the bill in the mail, a couple of weeks later, there's really no surprises. It kind of makes my life easier. Okay, so it's now, we've done our bought an airplane, we've had a pre-purchase inspection. You've got a list from the mechanics during the pre-purchase that identified a number, hopefully a small number of items that require attention. Airworthiness directives, safety bulletins, and safety-related items should have been dealt with right after the pre-purchase. Left over from the pre-purchase might be some discretionary, nice to have, but non-essential items like some upgrades. And you might consider adding them to your mechanics list. And that might be upgrades like USB panel-mounted charging ports. Maybe the aircraft doesn't have a graphic engine monitor that Doug and his previous graphs presentation, showed some very cool graphs. You might consider those kind of upgrades. But essentially, the annual inspections has two parts. Step one is to remove all the inspection panels and cowlings and seats and perform a compression test, check the airworthiness directives, see if there's any new ones, service bulletins. I mean, that's just kind of naming a few. And you essentially create a list of must do, should do, and items that could be deferred depending on your budget. After part one is completed, as I said earlier, you should meet with your mechanics to review the results of the inspection and work out estimates of what needs to be repaired and what, as I said earlier, what you can defer. And again, you end up with this budget that is going to be executed against in the second phase of the annual, and essentially avoiding that heart-clenching surprise when you get the bill in the mail. Well, critical dates need to be identified and documented either in the logbooks or in a spreadsheet. And these would be time-sensitive maintenance items like oil changes. You might decide to change your oil every 25 hours, 35 hours, 50 hours, etc. Magneto inspections and repairs, IFR certification, ELT batteries, and kind of the list goes on and on. You might have recurring ADs. Every 150 hours, something needs to be inspected. Effective on August 1st, 2019, ELT testing requirements have changed, and Pete's going to talk about the new performance testing and operational tests. And there are two different tests, and one of them, and I'll hold that for Pete, can be conducted by the pilot owner. And as I said earlier, the first annual is a perfect time to install any new upgrades. You know, essentially, with the airplane taken apart to 1,000 pieces, it's a great time to install new wiring, as in the case of doing an ADSB installation, or, as I said earlier, graphic engine monitor or panel-mounted USB ports. The idea being that you can save some labor hours with the airplane already opened up for the inspection.
Bill, do you want your spreadsheet now?
I do. Thank you. Well, I try to, walk the walk and talk the talk, as a great actor said once. And I apologize. This is an example of my little time tracking spreadsheets. Sorry, it's a bit of an eye chart. There's a lot of information, but you should really get the idea of the process. In order to get the sheet to fit into PowerPoint, I didn't include all of the columns, but the spreadsheet's essentially split into two main areas: airworthiness directives at the top, and ongoing maintenance after that. At the very top of the spreadsheet, which you don't actually see in the PowerPoint, is the total hours on the airplane, which I update every few weeks. And then the spreadsheet calculates the hours remaining, for example, the hours remaining before the next oil change. As you can see, there's some maintenance items which are date sensitive, like the biannual IFR certification or the 10-year prop inspection and overhaul. Well, hopefully, as you might notice, the good news is with the Commander, there are very few new items added to the AD list. So the only thing being updated are really the dates and times. For maintenance items like the 500-hour magneto inspection, the spreadsheet calculates time remaining. And this should give you plenty of warning to let the shop know and get them lined up to remove and get your magnetos inspected. While on the subject of magnetos, as you heard from Roger, you might consider replacing your mechanical mags with solid-state mags at the next inspection and repair cycle. Surefly Aero's solid-state mags have a 2200 hour inspection versus the 500-hour typical inspection. And in fact, when they hit 2,200 hours, Surefly just sells you a discounted new solid-state mag, and you send in the old one as a core credit. Over to you, Roger.
Are you on mute, Roger?
I come on here. There we go. I hit the right buttons. It helps. Can you hear me now?
Loud and clear.
Okay. So you've got your new aircraft. You've flown it for a while, and now it's time for its first annual. And like any complex piece of machinery that is usually 30, 40, or 50 years old, surprise, there's always something. And that's part of owning a piece of equipment like this. We've all been kind of spoiled with the reliability of our next big expensive item being cars. Fuel injection, automatic everything, boom, boom, boom. I think a few of us remember the good old days, the old days of going out on a cold day and saying, is it going to be a 2-pump to set the choke or a 3-pump morning today? We don't think like that anymore, and we may get lulled into a false sense of it'll be perfect with the annual with this 50, 60, 70-year-old aircraft, even if it's perfectly maintained. Things break. There may be new airworthiness directives that pop out. There may be service advisories or service letters. I look at those all the time because they're usually a precursor to an AD or a bulletin or something. And it's good to be aware. Sometimes looking at the native country where the aircraft is built, they have service bulletins that you may have a hard time seeing here in Canada. Or users groups. I think Phil's mentioned, aircraft user groups are a great resource. And then, of course, parts availability. You may have to factor in that it may take X weeks to overhaul that muffler assembly because that's an ancient 1930s design. When you get the parts coming in, you got brokerage, freight costs to come in. All of this is sort of pointing to maybe having your annual done towards the end of the summer and giving you time over the winter to get parts together if there's stuff that may be going sideways on you. And if you don't do a lot of this research, your AME, quite justifiably, is probably going to charge you something for doing most of that research. But if you're going to be an engaged owner, you should be part of that. The other factor you want to keep in mind with surprises, and I would say the frequency of surprises you might see, is what kind of life does your aircraft live? Is it outside? Is it in a hangar? Is it flying exclusively off grass strips, exclusively off paved asphalt runways? That's a big factor. And remember, all the maintenance schedules that you are following, whether it's a TC approved or a TC sponsored one or a manufacturer's recommended one that's been approved, are developed under sort of a generic usage conditions. I'll point to examples with our tow planes at the gliding club I fly at. For example, we have a Pawnee and the Citabria. We're on grass almost exclusively. Some of the runways are bumpier than others. And we've gotten into a routine where, independent of what the service intervals are, is every spring we replace the tail wheels on the tail of the aircraft, overhaul, inspect them because we know they lead a rough life. We also, every 2 years, will replace, particularly on the Citabria, there are bolts that hold the spring steel gear in. They're known to fail. There's been many incidents of that. We're in a habit now every 2 years, whether they need it or not, we take the gear off, replace those bolts. $6 bolts a piece, cheap insurance. We also said during one of our annuals on the Pawnee, it's got the Piper bungee gear up inside. There's a kit that's available, an approved kit, that's a safety cable. What happens is if the bungee's let loose or anything lets loose in that gear, that safety cable keeps the gear from splaying out and keeps the propeller from hitting the ground. So when you're thinking of upgrades, enhancements, and you're getting these indications from your annual, or if your aircraft is leading a little bit of a rougher life than just on a beautiful paved runway at Pearson or wherever you're flying from, you may want to think about these types of things and generating your own little list with your AME of watch items or just replace and just try to avoid having the downtime, at a strange airfield. Next slide. You may also have mandates. The ELT mandate is probably fresh in all our minds, and for privately registered aircraft, we have till, was it 2025, I believe it is?
That's right, November 2025.
So we're on borrowed time. You should have a plan. Or, how are you going? Have you allocated money to afford that? Have you put it on your Christmas present wish list? Maybe you got 3 Christmases still to go. So your significant other or your partner, maybe it can be that. So you got to kind of think ahead from a worst case scenario. Look at what these items are. Anybody that's got a Cessna knows all about seat rails and how they got to be inspected and replaced and everything else. We shouldn't be surprised too much, except for things that do fail catastrophically. But even then, you can still be prepared for stuff like that. Next slide.
Yes, sir.
Another thing is avionics upgrades, migration. Here's a great scenario. I have two friends that are going through this right now. They've got their DG and their AI. And one friend, the air pump, the vacuum pump has just died. And it's an older aircraft. It's an older AI and DG. It's not smooth, but you can hear it's kind of running a little noisy. Another friend, their AI died. And they have this pump, and now they got the DG, and it's running. And they looked at the cost of overhauling the AI. Is it time to bite the bullet and buy 1 or maybe 2 Garmin G5s or other UAvionics equivalents and put them in, get rid of the air pump, and try to increase the overall reliability of your system, your aircraft, by doing that? That might be good money spent in the long term. May not make any sense if you're going to get rid of things or not fly for 2 years, but over long term, you probably get that back in the price of the aircraft. And it's a safety and reliability enhancement. Aircraft performance, there's gap seals, special cowlings, everything else, all the stuff that glider pilots know all about on how to increase performance will keep you from burning extra dead dinosaurs. Ceramic coatings, there's a lot of talk, a lot of videos, a lot of information coming on that to protect paint. Canopy cleaners. Man, that's probably the best safety feature you could do for your aircraft. Clean your canopy so you can see what's going on out there rather than looking through the whole summer's dead bodies of bugs in front. I'll throw another thing here about airfoils. In the good old days of, Piper and Cessna and Beechcraft with, first generation airfoils, they could get pretty rough. When I say rough, dirty, grimy, the whole 9 yards, and there wouldn't be a big performance difference. In this day and age of laminar airfoils, and anybody that's flying a Cirrus or a Diamond aircraft, a higher aspect ratio, they are much more sensitive and have a far greater performance degradation when they get dirty. And this is a case where keeping them clean actually keeps your performance. In some airfoil cases, and you can dig this data up with sailplanes and gliders, they've gone through this scar tissue with multiple generations since the 60s. You could have a 30 to 35% performance degradation just from rain on a laminar airfoil, depending on the type. And the same goes if it gets heavily contaminated with bugs. So if you're buying that new Diamond, you might want to get used to keeping that wing a heck of a lot cleaner to keep the performance and everything else that you think you've got. Just throw that one out there. Cleanliness is a form of maintenance. Okay.
Well said, Roger. Yeah, cleanliness next to godliness. Look at the nose of that 172, that blunt object that's pushing through the sky. And there's probably a 172 out there at every flying club that could use 30 minutes of TLC, clean leading edges, and a clean windscreen, or as you call them, canopy. So you can actually look out the windscreen and go, is that a bug or is that an airplane coming towards me? I don't know. Let's wait and find out and see. Not a good answer. All right, ELTs. So I trust that everyone who's with us today is fully aware that Government of Canada, Transport Canada regulations have directed the migration to the 406 ELT. In most cases, for all of you out there, you must have the new ELT installed in your airplane and working by no later than November 2025. So as Roger said, a few Christmases from now. There are no direct alternatives to that ELT, but there are enhancements that will make it even better for you. They're not replacements. There's a thing called a PLB, or a personal locator beacon. One of those types of devices is in the upper right-hand corner of this presentation. The Spot X products are ones. There's others. Whether it's a 406 ELT or a PLB, all of these locator beacons, emergency locator transmitters, need to be registered with the Canadian Beacon Registry in Trenton. These are satellite-based systems like the 406, like the Spot. The Find Me Spot is an excellent GPS tracker as well that can serve as a PLB. It provides tracking, and there are also COPA discounts as well. Let's just look for a moment at what the differences are currently between the two standards. So every 12 months, there's a 121.5 megahertz only performance and corrosion test. There's a 12-month 406 self-test using the test function with the aircraft, with the ELT mounted in the aircraft using the aircraft antenna. And then there is a 24-month performance test, which cannot be performed in the aircraft, because in the performance test, the aircraft is actually, the ELT is actually turned on, not tested. And in that case, it has to be done in a isolated, electronic magnetically isolated shop container, so that the system doesn't get alerted and start having people launched or phone calls made or that sort of thing. So that's the difference between the two different types of testing, the self-testing and the performance testing. Operational testing and performance testing, sorry. To the two car standards there, we had 625 Appendix C and 571 Appendix G. That corrosion and inspection and performance is for the 121.5 is basically the same for the operational test. The 406 megahertz is a corrosion inspection performance, including digital messaging, confirming that the bit coding is all correct. And that is a test that has to be done in the shop. And all of those things came out with the back about a year or 2 years ago now, with the new battery performance standards. One of the things that's changed with the 406 is there's a 2-year inspection on the batteries and or replacement, depending on the manufacturer's requirements for the battery. So there is no hard number in the cars for the 406. It's what's regarding battery life. It's as per the manufacturer's stipulation. Let's go to the next slide. So these two words that have some people a little bit confused at times, operational test versus performance test. So the operational test is an on-aircraft confirmation that the system works using the testing function that's built into the unit as it came from the manufacturer. It may be using a panel that's panel mounted, a switch that's panel mounted. It may be a slightly different procedure as described in the manufacturer's documentation. As I said earlier, the other test, the performance test, is a signal radiation strength, and that requires the item to be turned on, which of course, if it was turned on in the airplane, you've now essentially launched SAR action, because now the system is going to see an activation, and that will trigger the response system, which will send an email to the owner, possibly a phone call from the Rescue Coordination Center, And so to prevent all of that kerfuffle, the performance test must be done in a shop environment using specialized equipment. It's not a long test, but that's what's required. And then, as we said, ELT, 12 months for the ops test, 24 months. Battery replacement as per the manufacturer's guidelines. And of course, journey log entries as per 625 Appendix C. God bless that. Phil, back to you, sir.
Okay, so we've just finished the first annual. It's your very first airplane. And I can tell you, having owned airplanes, that you get these butterflies in your gut. They become very active during that first flight. And it's could be one of life's most memorable moments, maybe right back to your first solo. But you need to kind of suppress that excitement and treat that first flight in a professional manner. Again, it's your life that we're talking about. You want to do all your homework well in advance of the first flight after annual. Update any checklists that might have changed based upon adding new avionics or doing upgrades like ADS-B. And perhaps you could get some support from the previous owner if they're not too far from your airport. After all, it's not a bad idea to get another set of eyes and ears. Take your time during the walk around. Make sure that you're not distracted. Try to avoid chatting with people, admiring your airplane or, answering your mobile phone. You want to check for any leaks like oil, fuel, or hydraulic fluid. I like to use a high intensity LED flashlight during my walk around. It helps me to just focus into areas of the aircraft that might be shaded or with viewing quantity of fuel in the tanks. I use it to help me look at the retractable landing gear. I look at fasteners, components. I look at aileron counterweights. You want to just be slightly pessimistic that maybe the mechanics didn't do quite a super job. A good friend of mine owned a Mooney, and for obvious reasons, we've had to change their names to protect the guilty. Had an oil change by a reputable shop who sadly only used 2 of the 30 fasteners to affix this engine panel. The mechanics missed it. The pilot owner during the walk around missed it. And then, of course, when he took off in the climb, the panel left the aircraft. Fortunately, didn't hurt the airplane, didn't strike the tail. Another good idea, as I said earlier, get the support from the previous owner, but you might want to consider taking a flight instructor with you, especially if you're a lower time pilot. You have all the appropriate documents in the airplane. Spend some time with your flight instructor, discuss a flight plan. Might actually be a good idea to wrap a biannual flight review into that flight, just to get you proficient with flying the airplane, as well as meeting your regulatory requirements. And you could be practicing, flying skills like slow flight, 360-degree turns, both at shallow and steep angles, forced landing, stalls, if your airplane is appropriate, spins. And with the help of your instructor, really get in tune with your aircraft while sharpening your skills. You want to know your emergency checklists and the procedures for engine failure, let's say during a climb out. That's a really bad time, obviously, for that to happen versus being at 8,000 feet AGL and cruise. So you want to remember those checklists: best glide speed, primer in, fuel selector to both, fuel pump on, engine restart, 120.15, Mayday, etc. And start to think in your mind, when would you consider a turn back to the airport if you were to lose the engine in climb out, at what altitude would you do it? Know your fuel system. Know how much fuel you burn. Let's just see here. And for me, when I do my annuals, I always do it around the airport, and it's a great place to be. Above the circuit, circling, just to ensure that everything's working well. I had a situation with another, my first commander, when my first airplane, low time pilot, first annual. Did the walk around, went through the checklist, took off in the climb out, pulled the gear up, nothing happened. Going, nuts. Now I'm getting a little worried. So, again, being a low time pilot, took off to the practice area, climbed to 5,500 feet, turned the autopilot on, pulled out the POH, went to the appropriate checklists for gear failure, and then I noticed the emergency gear extension handle, which was used during the annual, during their gear during the gear inspection, but the mechanics hadn't stowed it, hadn't put it into the normal position, and sadly, it wasn't. That wasn't part of the checklist. So I looked at the gear extension handle, the emergency gear dump, put it into the normal position, pulled up the gear, magic, Shazam! Gear came up, greens were turned off, 3 in the green were turned off, cycled the gear, they came down, 3 in the green, okay, I'm good to go, and continued my flight. So from my perspective, as I look back to that incident, being overhead the airport is really one of the safest places to be, especially if you were to have an engine failure. With that, I think it's over to you, Pete.
Thank you, Phil. Yeah, so we're getting to the conclusion. Let's start to wrap up things. So there really are pros and cons. I know the slide looks a little bit different here. There's cons. Mine's a bit different, but basically, the way I look at this, while we have both pros and cons here, in reality, I think these points are all really pros. It's a pro that part of the process creates self-reliance and learning. A pro is that you're getting on a pathway to doing more maintenance by yourself, for yourself. That's going to make you more of an owner, probably going to save you some money, and you'll be more self-aware. It's going to help mitigate the impact of surprise failures because there'll be fewer of those. You'll develop a proactive approach and deal with issues before they become an AOG issue, aircraft on ground, and this will, again, enhance your decision-making process. Time commitment, is that a pro or a con? I think it's worth it. So some people might look at that as a con, but I think it's worth it because it's going to enhance your ownership satisfaction. Basic mechanical understanding required? Sure. Same thing. But you're probably going to become more aware. You get a little bit of grease under your fingers. You'll be able to relate to the guy or the company that's fixing your airplane. And I think it makes you a more complete owner. People skills, definitely required, definitely a plus. And as Phil said at the beginning, see COPA flight articles, plane talk podcasts, COPA magazines, COPA national buyer's guides. There's lots of information out there that's going to make you a more complete owner. And that's really the whole point of our seminar session tonight. So we're going to start to wrap this up with contact information for Phil. COPA has started offering as one of our enhanced services access to Phil's Plane Talk material. I think it's a great addition to the breadth of material that COPA already provides and gives members another feather in their cap that gives them a better ownership experience. Some of the references from tonight, Phil, I'll turn that over to you if you want to do this one.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, there's, as Peter said, the COPA website is just a wealth of knowledge with some very cool,
sorry about that,
very cool content. A lot of well thought, well written, very deep guides that you can download and peruse, take a peek. We mentioned the Surefly Aero solid state mags. There's the website, and then as we started chatting earlier, here are all the references to the cars that align to ELTs, the maintenance schedule, care and custody, et cetera, et cetera. And with that, I think we can go to our questions.
Yeah, and Roger, why don't you explain what the heck that weird-looking cloud is?
Will do. I recognize some of the folks on this seminar as fellow glider pilots as well, so they already know. This is a photo taken down in Lake Placid, New York. It's a known wave flying area for glider pilots in eastern Canada. We go down every fall. Those two wave clouds are set up over the Sentinel Range, which are just downwind from Mount Whiteface Mountain. And with a northwest wind that had just blown a low pressure cell through, we had very stable air, and these lenticular clouds were formed. The tops of the clouds were just over 19,000 feet. I actually had a friend who was up in a glider in the middle of one of those clouds up on top, trying to get his gold FAI gold badge at that point. And a lot of us go down there and have a great blast down on Lake Placid, and it's also where I earned my FAI diamond badge for altitude gain. I got up to 23,300 feet in my glider down there. So we have a lot of fun in the fall down there and can get very high, and we get a wave window opened up into Class A airspace, and the FAA are very flexible with that. And yeah, I got a ton of pictures like that. So,
Oh, great.
Sharon, I think it's over to you. We are now, I think, basically delivery complete.
Sure, that you were all back by popular demand, as I guess referenced earlier. So thank you to the three of you for the series that we've had, this 3-part series. Through all the seminars in the past few months. Peter, did you want to go back and forth in the chat? Were there any specific questions in the chat that you wanted to address?
I had a quick look at a few of them. They're pretty wide-ranging comments. I know we talked about the spot and PLBs, and just to clarify, personal locator beacons, which some people consider the spot to be, but there are other, there are Garmin products and that there are other PLBs. Any personal locator beacon should be registered with the Canadian Beacon Registry, which is actually based in Trenton. That's also the place where your 406 ELT registration needs to be sent, since whenever a PLB is activated, then it's probably going to get involved with the 406 system.
So let me just jump in. We really have two technologies that we're talking about.
Yeah.
PLBs and 406s in one group, which use the worldwide COPA SARSAT system. And then we have PLDs, personal locating devices, and with any good aviation and computer folks, you have to have lots of 3-letter acronyms. The Find Me Spot, and as Peter mentioned, the Garmin products are a personal locating device. They use a completely different set of technologies, are monitored by a third-party organization called GEOS, and they end up as the middleware middle people between the device when it goes off, the PLD, and the search and rescue folks at Trenton. So they're kind of the same, but kind of different. Think of it, I like to think of it, and I have both. I like to think of them as belts and suspenders. You know, the little portable personal locating beacon 406, manually activated by user, you know, on your person as you exit, and a personal locating device like a spot tracker that delivers little digital breadcrumbs for search and rescue to hopefully be able to follow. So again, slightly different.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that, that additional add-on there, Phil. Roger, did you have anything else to add on to that, or are we satisfied with Phil and Pete's comment?
No, I love the analogies. I think it's great. Suspenders and belts and all that. That's a really good way to think of it. No, I don't, Sharon. Thanks.
Okay, well, very good. I'm just looking through the chat here, and I'm going back to a question on, let's see here. It's a pretty specific question to logbooks being missing. I think we might have answered this in a previous seminar, actually, but what do you do if some of the original logbooks are missing, but the aircraft looks great otherwise? And then there's a specific comment here to a 1965 Cherokee 180T. The logbooks only go back to the 80s. The first book was lost. Is there a legal issue with that? So, anybody want to take that on of what to do? And I think that's more of an aircraft ownership in buying that, but
I think that would be a kind of a yikes moment. There's absolutely no doubt that two airplanes exactly the same, one with all the logbooks and one with a small amount of logbooks. The one with all the logbooks is going to be more valuable. The logbooks paint a picture of how the aircraft is flown, where it's flown, how often it's flown. And without access to that rich history, it adds a little bit of risk. And anytime you add risk to a purchase, that should impact price. Now, I would just say that with a caveat that I'm not a lawyer, I'm not an accountant. I did stay in a Holiday Inn last night. Just kidding. But I would say that we're in a seller's market right now, with aircraft prices going way up and a shrinkage of inventory. So it can be quite challenging to find a good airplane that's 120% clean. And as we're in, sadly, the used aircraft transaction world is a completely buyer beware. So you kind of want to look at, how much of the story isn't being told. How old is the airplane? Is it missing a lot of the story or just a little bit? And again, that's about the implication to risk. Hope that helped.
Thanks very much for taking the time to answer that, Phil. I'm going to go way back. There was a question earlier on the torque tube. So there was a question for Peter to repeat your comment on that aspect of the presentation.
Yeah, it was actually Phil's. There was another one too about the CAWIS website, CAWIS. I know it didn't come out quite that way, but that's the actual name of the Transport Canada website. And the torque tube was actually Phil. He was talking about his airplane, and
Sure.
the euphemistic $1.25 bolt, which I saw somebody said, "Show me a $1.25 bolt for an airplane," implying that it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
but much cheaper than what would happen if it breaks and you have to do a gear up landing.
So again, the idea is that you have this in the Commander, we have trailing link landing gear. And the airplane was kind of designed with a rich military history. So the landing gear are really big, really chunky, and they're held into the wing using this torque tube that the gear, pivots around. And that torque tube has a little bolt that stops it from moving in and out. So what typically happens is you come in for your landing, and a bunch of some of my Commander friends have had this happen. They come in for a landing, they hit it a little hard. That bolt has already been worn over, let's say it's been in there, it's a 1975 Commander, so it's been in there for like 40 years plus. Bolt breaks and the tube shifts out of its slot, and that causes the gear to fold. That causes the wingtip to fall down, and bad things to happen. So the idea is that when the airplane is up on its during an annual, and the airplane is up on jacks to do a gear extension, it's a perfect time to unscrew this little bolt, and it's literally maybe this long. You can see the small bolt. And again, I just used the $1.25 as an example. It's not a very big bolt, but it's a great time to pull them out. I've done it on my Commander, Commander I own in partnership, and they've come out worn, and we put new ones in, and a little bit of proactive maintenance.
I've got a little gear story that might be a good thread to carry on with that one, Phil. I don't remember which model Piper it was, but there is one, and this is highlighting, this will be an example of beware of aircraft, not so much that are using non-standard practices. There are a lot of production aircraft that are using non-standard practices in their assembly to do things like maintain clearances, and it's been approved because it's noted in the maintenance manual. If your AME, or if it's your owner maintenance aircraft, and you look at it and say, oh, that bolt has to be assembled with the head up, so you always keep the head up in a vertical mount, et cetera, et cetera. This particular aircraft with the retractable gear, it was mounted upside down, and that's an accepted practice for that aircraft, noted so in the maintenance manual. So the reason was to provide clearance. So what happened is the AME that did the work looked at that and said, that's been installed incorrectly, without consulting the maintenance manual, not being familiar with that aircraft, installed it the generally accepted airmanship standard, what is it, AC 43 approach, right, with the head up. They took off, they tried to retract the gear, and gear couldn't retract because of the clearance problem. So it's an interesting example of just how what seems like the most simplistic, best intentioned things, go to the maintenance manual, go to the repair manual, go to the pilot operating handbook for that aircraft, that serial number aircraft that they're valid for, and make sure they're up to date, because unless your AME is truly, truly intimately aware, you may, for all the best intentions, induce a fault, right? And you're looking at it from a preventative perspective, but even from a best intention perspective, you could induce a fault. Right?
Yep.
That was a really good example. Thank you very much for that. Always learning, and even from a very different vantage point of in my flying journey, it's been a really good presentation to learn from. We are nearing the end of the evening, however. I know that we want to stay here for as long as we can, but we always want to keep them coming back for more. So I'll ask a couple more questions.
Sharon, if I may, there was one comment there I saw in the chat about people asking about legal requirements for doing things like removing vacuum pumps.
Okay.
So in that rather vague and weird, if you've never looked at it and never read it, it reads like an automatic sleep-inducing product. The spec sheets that were drawn up a long time ago in the nation of origin of your aircraft, if it's a certified aircraft. There's a list of things that make the aircraft airworthy. So, for instance, in a 172 or 150 or whatever, there is a vacuum pump to power the vacuum-powered instruments. If you replace the vacuum pump or take the vacuum pump out, that would by itself negate the airworthiness of the airplane unless the replacement system is what's called STC, Supplementary Type Certified. And in that STC documentation, it probably would tell you that as a result of doing this, you can take out the vacuum pump. So basically, the STC is the legal authority that allows you to remove things like the vacuum pump when you're replacing it with something else, provided the replacement has been properly documented and approved by either the FAA or Transport Canada. And what happens in Canada for American products that are STC'd is they're either rubber stamped or there is compatible documentation coming across the border. And that is the, quote, legal backstop for those who are doing that. So, yeah, you can do it provided that what you're doing is an authorized replacement, if you will.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Peter, Roger, and Phil. I'm going to look back to the aircraft preheating topic while we're here. There was a question earlier if there were any solutions for preheating for tied down aircraft without access to electricity. For example, they can't run a cord to an outlet. And that's over to you, Doug.
Yeah, question that's asked many times. And obviously a generator, if you are allowed to use those at the airport, works. Our system, I breezed through it quite quickly. The 4-cylinder system draws 240 watts. The 6-cylinder is 460 watts. So a 1,000-watt generator will easily run that. And if it's an inverter generator, many of our customers in the northern part climates will run them all night because you like a Honda 1000 will throttle down to just whatever you're using, and you're able to go that route. And we have used batteries. So for instance, in the Northeast, more the higher populated area out in New York doesn't allow a generator. So a battery or 2 batteries in tandem and an inverter will get you a couple hours or even up to 4 or 5 hours of preheating. Again, 240 watts divided by 12, you got 30 amps. If you have a 300 amp hour battery, you got yourself 4 or 5 hours, 6 hours of preheating.
Cool.
Very good. Okay, I'm gonna ask the most important question of the night. I didn't say anything earlier. I left it to Peter to introduce himself in his new role. So Peter, as the new chief flying instructor at the Kingston Flying Club, what do you miss most about COPA, and what what excites you in your new role?
Well, I must say the COPA team was a pleasure to work with, you, Sharon, and everyone else there. Also, the breadth of what COPA represents for general aviation in Canada was a very refreshing and very stimulating year. But I had to ultimately realize that in this old dog's genetic makeup, there was the need to fly and the need to teach. And I wasn't really able to do either when I was consumed by my full-time job at COPA. So I had to take a change of pace and have a very good flying club that's been around since 1929, but a little bit lost and needed some, we'll call it guidance and renovation. So we're kind of rebuilding a very worthwhile cause in Kingston at the Kingston Flying Club, and a lot of success there. So moving from one success at COPA to hopefully another success at the Kingston Flying Club. And we welcome all the general aviation people to come down, pay us a visit, share a coffee and a good story, and or come and fly and train with us.
Here. Looking forward to all the wins that you'll certainly have over at the Kingston Flying Club. And I said it in the chat, it is hard to compete with having the sky as your office. So we we certainly miss you at COPA. And just for all those who are curious, Peter has been helping us along, and he's here tonight. Still outside of his role, so it's nice to keep in touch. And we just appreciate all the knowledge that you share with us, and that's the beautiful thing about aviation. There's many characters who have a lot of information to share, and Peter is one of them. So I think that's a good way to wrap up tonight's seminar. I did put down some links for our seminars coming up. There is one next week. Whether or not you have chosen to embrace the world of drones, we do have a presentation to better understand how to get started if you're curious about it, some common issues when it comes to different types of drone aircraft, as well as some recent incident and accident trends so that we can learn from them, and a incoming RPAS safety management system. This is new, that's coming to Canada, and COPA is certainly looking to support that data to really drive more safety when it comes to flying, both in industry and for those hobbyists out there. So keep an eye out for that. Outside of that seminar, we have one on helicopter operations in November. We have the Helicopter Association of Canada. We have TSB, the Transportation Safety Board, as well as Transport Canada. So it's a pretty big panel with regulator and industry talking about the recreational, to take a pulse of recreational flying when it comes to helicopter operations. So hope to see you there, but thank you very much for spending an evening with COPA, and I hope you'll have a great rest of your evening. Recording is coming soon, and see you at our next seminar. Have a great night, everyone. Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Sharon.
Bye.
Thanks, Sharon. Thanks, guys. Thanks again. Great production. Number one.
Number one. Good night, everyone.
Nice to meet you there, Doug.
Yeah, nice to see you, Doug.
Thanks,
Again.
guys.
Bye, Doug. Thanks very much. Cheers.